The shove wasn't the mistake. It was the confession. Darius Thompson had just pushed his pregnant wife, Monique, out of the boardroom in front of 15 investors. But what he'd really done was assault the hidden majority owner of Summit Core Innovations. Her heels clicked against marble as she stumbled toward the door, but the sound was nothing compared to the silence that would soon crush his empire. Darius had spent 3 years building his reputation as CEO, while Monique secretly controlled 60% of the company through shell corporations, a legacy from her family's Atlanta dynasty. His hands shoving her had just ended the test and his career. The investors shifted uncomfortably, but their discomfort wasn't about the domestic humiliation they'd witnessed. It was about what would happen when their mysterious majority shareholder stopped pretending to be powerless. Darius turned back to his presentation, dismissing his wife with a wave. Claire, his assistant and mistress, exchanged a satisfied glance with him from across the conference table. Neither understood that Monique's attorney had been documenting every violation, every conflict of interest, every betrayal for months. The baby growing inside Monique wasn't just an heir to love. It was the future owner of the company Darius thought he'd built from nothing. Monique's hand reached for the door handle, but instead of leaving, she pulled out her phone. The boardroom had fallen into that particular silence that follows public humiliation, the kind where everyone pretends they didn't see what they just witnessed. 15 investors sat frozen in their leather chairs, eyes darting between tablets and presentation screen, anywhere but the door. Darius cleared his throat, confidence already rebuilding itself. Gentlemen, my apologies for the interruption. As I was saying, our Q3 projections show a 34% increase in. But Monique didn't leave. She stood there, one hand on the door handle, the other cradling her swollen belly. 6 months pregnant, wearing a modest gray dress from Target that she'd deliberately chosen that morning. The same way she'd deliberately chosen everything for the past 18 months. Her phone buzzed. A single text from Naomi Sterling, her attorney. Everything's ready. Your call. Monique looked up at the boardroom, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Chicago's financial district, the mahogany table, the investors who'd made fortunes on other people's dreams. She'd sat in rooms like this her entire life. Rooms her father had commanded. Rooms that had taught her power wasn't about volume. It was about timing. Actually, Monique said quietly, her voice carrying despite its softness, I think I'll stay. The room froze. Darius' head snapped toward her, expression flickering between annoyance and confusion. Claire's satisfied smirk faltered. Monique, Darius said, his tone carefully controlled. We're in the middle of something important. Why don't you? I know exactly what you're in the middle of. You're presenting Q3 projections to investors. Projections that show a 34% increase in user acquisition, a 28% bump in revenue, and a concerning 15% rise in operational costs that you've conveniently buried in the appendix. The investors' heads turned toward her in unison. Darius' jaw tightened. This isn't the time. You're also about to propose a Series B funding round. $12 million at a pre-money valuation of $45 million, which would dilute existing shareholders by approximately 21%. Richard Caldwell, a silver-haired investor, leaned forward. I'm sorry, Mrs. Thompson, but how do you know the details of a confidential investor meeting? Monique finished. She smiled without warmth. That's an excellent question, Mr. Caldwell. Darius stepped forward, his charm slipping. Monique, you're tired. The pregnancy. Don't. The single word cut through the room. Don't you dare use my pregnancy as an excuse to dismiss me. Not now. Not after what you just did in front of these people. Claire had gone very still. Monique pulled out her phone and tapped the screen. Gentlemen, I think it's time we had a different conversation. The one about who actually owns Summit Core Innovations. Darius laughed, a short, dismissive sound. The ownership structure is clearly defined. I founded this company, and these investors provided 40% of the initial capital. Yes, I know. I've read the term sheets. All of them. She swiped her phone, and suddenly the presentation screen flickered. Darius's slides disappeared, replaced by a corporate structure chart showing a web of shell corporations, LLCs, and offshore entities, all tracing back to one name, Davis Holdings, LLC. Below that, in simple black text, principal owner, Monique E. Davis. The room went silent. Darius stared at the screen, face draining of color. What the hell is this? The truth. The truth that I've hidden for 18 months while I watched you build this company on my family's money. The truth that you never bothered to investigate because you were too busy building your ego and sleeping with your assistant. Claire made a small sound between a gasp and a whimper. Richard Caldwell stood slowly. Ms. Davis, are you saying you're the majority shareholder? 60%, to be exact. Acquired through strategic investments beginning 14 months ago. All legally documented, all properly filed, all completely invisible to anyone who didn't know where to look. Marcus Webb, a younger investor, pulled out his phone and started typing. Within seconds, his expression confirmed what Monique already knew. Every word could be verified. Darius' hands shook. This is insane. You're my wife. You're an interior designer. You work from home. You don't have that kind of money. My family does. The Davis family of Atlanta. Perhaps you've heard of Davis Holdings? Davis Commercial Properties? Davis Venture Capital. Recognition spread across the room. The Davis family wasn't just wealthy, they were generational wealth. Old money. My father died 2 years ago, Monique continued, voice steady despite the emotion underneath. He left me controlling interest in a portfolio worth approximately $3.2 billion. But before he died, he gave me advice. People show you who they really are when they think you're powerless. She looked directly at Darius. So I tested you. I hid my wealth, lived modestly, played the supportive wife. And you passed at first. You were kind, ambitious, genuine. Or so I thought. Darius opened his mouth, but no words came. Then I invested in your company. Quietly. Through intermediaries. I watched you pitch, build your team, work 16-hour days. And I was proud of you. She paused, hand moving to her belly. But then things changed. You started working later. Coming home smelling like perfume that wasn't mine. Buying clothes you couldn't afford. Mentioning Claire more than necessary. Claire had gone completely white. I hired a private investigator. The affair started 5 months ago, right around the time I got pregnant. The investors stared at Darius, expressions ranging from shock to disgust. And then today, you pushed me, your pregnant wife, in front of the people whose money you desperately need. Because I dared to suggest you reconsider terms that would screw over your existing investors. She tapped her phone. Naomi, we're ready. The door opened, and a tall black woman in an impeccable suit entered, followed by 2 associates carrying boxes of documents. Gentlemen, Naomi Sterling said, crisp and professional, I'm Ms. Davis's attorney. We have materials regarding Mr. Thompson's management of Summit Core Innovations. Darius found his voice. You can't do this. This is my company. I built this. With my money, Monique said quietly. Money you never knew came from me. Money you've been mismanaging for months while you prioritized your affair over fiduciary responsibility. Naomi's associates distributed folders to each investor. Inside, you'll find documentation of several concerning practices, unauthorized bonuses, conflicts of interest, and a particularly interesting employment contract for Ms. Claire Morrison that includes compensation well above market rate. Claire stood abruptly, chair scraping. I don't have to listen to this. Actually, you do, Naomi said coolly. You're named in several of these documents. I'd suggest you stay. Monique watched as the investors flipped through folders, expressions darkening with each page. She felt the baby kick, a strong, insistent movement reminding her why this mattered beyond her own hurt. This child would inherit everything. This child would learn from her mother's example. And that example couldn't be one of staying silent while being betrayed and diminished. Monique, we can talk about this. Privately. This doesn't have to. You had 18 months to talk to me. 18 months where you could have been honest. Where you could have shown me who you really were instead of making me uncover it piece by piece. She turned to the investors. Gentlemen, I'm calling an emergency shareholder meeting for tomorrow morning. As majority owner, that's within my rights. At that meeting, we'll be discussing a change in management structure. I think it's time Summit Core had leadership that actually understands integrity. Richard Caldwell closed his folder. I think that's appropriate, Ms. Davis. The other investors nodded. Darius stood there, his carefully constructed world crumbling. The CEO who'd commanded the room 15 minutes ago now looked like exactly what he was, a man who'd built his empire on sand. Monique walked toward the door, Naomi falling into step beside her. Monique, wait. Darius started forward, but Naomi held up a hand. Any further communication goes through me. Mr. Thompson. As they reached the door, Monique turned back one last time. 18 months. That's how long I gave you to show me who you really were. You showed me. And now everyone else knows too. The door closed with a quiet click that sounded, to Darius, like the end of everything. 18 months earlier, Monique Davis had made a decision that would either validate her father's wisdom or destroy her faith in love completely. Standing in her late father's corner office in the Davis Tower in Atlanta, she stared at the engagement ring on her finger. The flawless diamond couldn't hide the doubts consuming her mind. Darius Thompson seemed perfect, ambitious, charismatic, self-made from Chicago's South Side. But Monique had watched too many men transform when they discovered her family's wealth. Her father had died 8 months prior, but his final words still echoed. Test them, Monique. Test everyone. People show you who they really are when they think you're powerless. The decision crystallized that afternoon. Monique would hide her wealth so completely that even the man she married wouldn't know he'd exchanged vows with one of Atlanta's wealthiest heiresses. Her attorney, Naomi Sterling, had argued against the plan. This is extreme, Naomi said, sitting across from Monique, legal documents spread between them. You're creating an entirely false identity. What if he finds out? What if this backfires? Then I'll know he wasn't the one. My father taught me that money reveals character faster than anything else. I need to know if Darius loves me, or the idea of what I could become. Naomi sighed, but did her job. Within 2 weeks, Monique's visible assets had been transferred into a labyrinth of blind trusts and shell corporations. Her name disappeared from Forbes lists. Her social media was scrubbed clean. The alter ego was born, Monique Davis, modest interior designer with student loans and a small Lincoln Park apartment that she'd purchased through one of her LLCs and deliberately underfurnished with IKEA and Target finds. Darius had met this version of Monique at a tech networking event in Chicago 6 months before the engagement. She'd worn a dress from Nordstrom Rack, not because she couldn't afford better, but because she needed him to see her as attainable. What she hadn't faked was her intelligence. When Darius talked about venture capital and startup culture, Monique engaged with insights from years of her father's investment meetings. That part, she couldn't hide. Didn't want to. And Darius had been captivated. Their first date was coffee at a neighborhood cafe in Wicker Park. Darius insisted on paying, and Monique let him, even though the checking account linked to her fake identity had exactly $847, money she'd deposited specifically to maintain the illusion. I like you, Darius said at the end of that first date, his smile genuine. You're different. You're not trying to impress anyone. Monique smiled back, thinking, if only you knew. The courtship unfolded over 4 months. They walked along Lake Michigan, sharing dreams and fears. Darius talked about his childhood on the South Side, his mother who'd worked 2 jobs, his determination to build something that mattered. Monique shared carefully curated stories about growing up in Atlanta. True stories, just with the wealth edited out. She watched him during those months. How he treated waitstaff. How he talked about competitors. How he reacted when she couldn't afford to split expensive dinners. And he passed every test. He was patient, kind, ambitious, but not ruthless. He talked about building a company that would create jobs, not just profits. He listened when she talked about design theory. When he proposed, 10 months into their relationship, Monique cried real tears. The ring had cost him 3 months' salary according to the credit card receipt she'd later found. It was modest by her standards, but the fact that he'd saved for it meant everything. I don't have much right now, Darius said, kneeling in his small Pilsen apartment. But I'm going to build something. For us. For our future. I promise you, Monique, I'm going to make you proud. She said yes, and meant it. The wedding was intimate. A boutique hotel in Lincoln Park, 50 guests, champagne at $40 per bottle. Monique's mother flew in from Atlanta, playing her role perfectly as the widow of a comfortable businessman. No one mentioned the private jet parked at a different airport. Monique wore a gown from a local designer. She'd left the vintage Givenchy in storage. The marriage certificate read Monique Davis Thompson. But in boardrooms across the Southeast, executives still answered to Ms. Davis. The first 6 months were good. Darius was attentive, passionate, driven. He'd come home from his corporate job and talk about his dreams of starting his own company. Monique encouraged him, asking questions that pushed his thinking. You really get this stuff, Darius said one night. Have you thought about doing more than design work? I'm happy supporting you, Monique replied. Which was true, in its way. She worked from home, taking on small interior design clients. But her real work happened in encrypted sessions with Naomi, managing her family's portfolio, making investments, watching markets move at her command. Darius never questioned the video calls she took behind closed doors. She'd explain them as client consultations. He believed her completely. That trust was both beautiful and heartbreaking. Then, 1 year into their marriage, Darius came home with news. I'm doing it. I'm starting Summit Core. I've been talking to investors, and 3 of them are ready to commit. We're going to build something incredible. Monique congratulated him, listened to his plans, played the supportive wife perfectly. And then she called Naomi. I want to invest. In his company? Monique, are you sure? Structure it through the Cayman subsidiaries. Make it look like standard venture capital. I want 60% ownership, but I want it invisible. That's a lot of control to hide. I know. But this way, I'll see how he handles real power. If he can't handle success without me as a visible partner, I'll know before we bring children into this. Naomi made it happen. Through shell corporations and strategic investments, Monique purchased majority ownership of Summit Core without Darius ever knowing the money came from his wife. She watched him build the company over the next 6 months. Watched him hire staff, pitch to investors, transform from the man she'd married into someone who commanded rooms. And she watched the changes. The first sign was subtle. He started coming home later. Monique understood. Her father had taught her that building something real required obsession. But then there was the perfume. Not hers. Lighter. Floral. Clinging to his collar one Wednesday evening when he came home at midnight. Late investor meeting, he explained, kissing her forehead. Monique smiled and let it go. But she noticed. Then there were the clothes. Suddenly his closet filled with Italian labels. Tom Ford suits. Ferragamo shoes. Brands that didn't align with his salary. Investor meetings. Gotta look the part. But Monique knew Summit Core's margins. She reviewed every financial document through her shell corporation ownership. The company was doing well, but not multiple Tom Ford suits well. She said nothing, just watched. Then there was Claire. Claire Morrison had joined Summit Core 8 months in as an executive assistant. Young, blonde, Stanford MBA. Competent, according to the performance reviews Monique read through her hidden access. But Darius talked about her constantly. Claire reorganized our investor pipeline. Claire found a better vendor for our cloud services. Claire suggested we pivot our marketing strategy. At first, Monique pushed down the jealousy. She was successful in her own right, hidden though it was. But then she noticed how his eyes lingered on his phone when Claire's name appeared. How he smiled at messages during dinner. How he started scheduling emergency meetings on weekends. Monique held off as long as she could. But 5 months ago, when she discovered she was pregnant, she made a decision. She needed to know. The private investigator Naomi hired was discreet and thorough. The photos arrived via encrypted email 3 weeks later. Darius and Claire, leaving a hotel in River North. Darius and Claire, having dinner at a restaurant he'd told Monique he couldn't stand. Darius and Claire, his hand on her lower back in a way that spoke of intimacy. The dates made it clear. The affair started right around the time Monique got pregnant. She sat in her home office, staring at the images, hand on her still flat stomach. The pain was visceral, sharp. But underneath was something else. Clarity. Her father had been right. People showed you who they were when they thought you were powerless. And Darius had shown her exactly who he was. Monique considered confronting him immediately. But Naomi urged caution. You're pregnant. You're emotional. Think strategically. So Monique thought. And planned. And prepared. She continued playing the supportive wife. Making him coffee. Asking about his day. Attending company events where Claire would be present. Watching them pretend to be professional. All while building her case. She documented every financial irregularity. Every unauthorized bonus. Every company expense that looked like a personal luxury. Every piece of evidence showing he'd been treating Summit Core like his personal bank account. She sat through dinners where Darius complained about demanding investors, not knowing he was complaining about shell corporations she controlled. She listened to him talk about Claire's brilliance, not knowing she'd seen their intimate texts. She felt the baby grow, this child who would inherit everything, and made a promise. Her daughter, because somehow she'd known from the first ultrasound, would never watch her mother be dismissed, would never see power as something requiring raised voices. She would see power as knowing exactly when to reveal it. The night before the boardroom confrontation, Monique stood in their Lincoln Park condo, looking out at the Chicago skyline. Darius was asleep, exhausted from another late meeting that had probably been another hotel room with Claire. Monique placed her hand on her swollen belly and whispered, "Tomorrow, sweetheart. Tomorrow you'll see what it means to stand up for yourself." The baby kicked in response, strong and insistent. Monique smiled in the darkness. Her father's final lesson was about to be proven right. People showed you who they were when they thought you were powerless. Tomorrow, she'd show them what happened when the powerless revealed they'd held all the cards from the beginning. The transformation in Darius hadn't been sudden. It had been a slow erosion. Monique watched it happen with the careful attention of someone trained from childhood to read power dynamics and character flaws. 3 months after Summit Core's launch, Darius started making decisions without her input. Small things at first. Redecorating their apartment without asking. Ironic, given she was supposedly an interior designer. Changing dinner plans at the last minute. Speaking over her in social situations. Finishing her sentences as if he knew her thoughts better than she did. "You don't understand the pressure I'm under," he said one evening when she pointed out that he'd committed them to a weekend getaway without checking if she was available. Monique let it go. She was playing a long game. But the changes accelerated. At Summit Core, Darius transformed from the collaborative, humble man she'd married into something else. Monique knew this because she'd made it her business to know everything in the company she secretly owned. She had access to all company emails through her shell corporation's controlling interest. She'd required, through legal proxies Darius didn't know existed, that all board meetings be recorded. She'd even had Naomi hire a consultant who occasionally visited Summit Core, reporting back on company culture. What she learned broke her heart in slow motion. Darius had become the kind of leader he'd once criticized. Arrogant in meetings, dismissive of ideas that didn't originate from him, quick to take credit, slow to give it. The recorded board meetings were particularly revealing. "That's a terrible idea," she'd heard him say to Marcus Webb, one of his early investors. "With all due respect, Marcus, I built this company. I know what works." The "with all due respect" held no respect whatsoever. Or the time he publicly dressed down a junior developer in an all-hands meeting for missing an unreasonable deadline. "This is unacceptable. In startups, we don't make excuses. We deliver." The young developer stood there, face burning, while colleagues looked away. Monique listened to that recording in her home office, hand on her 4-month pregnant belly, feeling sick. This wasn't the man she'd married. Or maybe it was, and pressure had finally revealed his true nature. Then there was Claire. Claire Morrison had been promoted from executive assistant to director of investor relations after just 5 months. It was a meteoric rise that raised eyebrows. Eyebrows Monique heard about through her consultant's reports. "She's good," the consultant reported. "Competent, professional. But the speed of her promotion has people talking. Especially when there were more experienced candidates available." "What are they saying?" Monique asked. "That she and Darius are close. Too close." At home, Darius mentioned Claire with increasing frequency. "Claire thinks we should target enterprise clients. Claire found a brilliant PR firm. Claire suggested I update my wardrobe for investor meetings." That last one made Monique pause. She looked at her husband across the dinner table, a dinner she'd spent an hour preparing while he'd been stuck in traffic. "Your assistant is giving you fashion advice?" "She's not just an assistant anymore. She's director of investor relations. And yes, image matters in this business. You of all people should understand that. You of all people." As if her work as an interior designer somehow made her superficial, Monique swallowed the retort. Instead, she smiled. "Of course, you're right." But she noted it. Another data point in the emerging pattern. The nights he came home late increased. The excuses became more elaborate. And the perfume, always that same light, floral scent, became a regular presence. When she hit 5 months pregnant and started showing noticeably, Darius's reaction was complicated. "You're glowing," he said, touching her stomach with seeming affection. "But then, maybe you should take it easy. Stay home more. The stress isn't good for the baby." Translation: don't come to company events. Don't be visible. Don't remind people I have responsibilities beyond my startup. Monique started attending Summit Core events anyway. Not all of them. She had to maintain the illusion, but enough to observe. At a company holiday party 3 months before the boardroom confrontation, she watched Darius and Claire interact with anthropological attention. They stood close, not inappropriately, but closer than colleagues needed to be. When Darius told a story, Claire laughed with her whole body, touching his arm in a gesture that lasted too long. When Claire spoke, Darius leaned in, giving her the focused attention he used to give Monique. "Your wife is lovely," one of the investor's spouses said that night, following her gaze. "How do you handle him working such long hours?" "You do what you have to do. Building a company takes sacrifice. You're very understanding." If only she knew. Later that night, Monique watched Darius and Claire step onto the venue's balcony. Through the glass doors, their body language was intimate in the way that comes from shared secrets. She excused herself to the restroom and instead slipped out a side door, positioning herself where she could hear without being seen. "Can't keep doing this," Claire was saying, voice low but intense. "Someone's going to notice. Let them notice. I built this company. I can handle office gossip." "It's not about the gossip, Darius. It's about your wife." A pause. Then, "Monique doesn't understand this world. She's supportive, but she doesn't get what it takes to build something from nothing. You do." Monique pressed her back against the cold brick wall, forcing herself to breathe evenly. "You said you were going to tell her," Claire continued. "I will. After the baby comes. After the series B closes. I can't deal with personal drama when we're this close to everything we've worked for." Everything we've worked for. Monique returned to the party, smiled through another hour of small talk, and went home with Darius like nothing had happened. But she called Naomi the next morning. "I need to accelerate the timeline." "What happened?" "He's planning to leave me. After the baby. After he secures the next funding round. He's going to divorce me and marry Claire, and he thinks he's going to do it with the company intact." "The company you own 60% of." "Exactly. So what do you want to do?" Monique looked out the window, watching Chicago winter settle over Lincoln Park. "I want to give him enough rope to hang himself. I want him to show everyone who he really is. And then I want to take back what's mine. When? Soon. I'll let you know when the moment's right." That moment came 2 weeks later, when Darius scheduled the crucial Series B investor meeting, the one where he planned to secure $12 million that would make him feel invincible. Monique decided that invincibility needed to be shattered. The night before the meeting, Darius was unusually attentive. "Big day tomorrow," he said, bringing her tea as she sat with her feet up, belly large enough now that simple tasks had become challenging. "I know. You've been preparing for weeks. This could change everything for us. Once this round closes, we'll be on track for a Series C next year. Maybe even an acquisition. We're talking generational wealth, Monique." Generational wealth. She almost laughed. "Instead, I'm proud of you." And she had been, in a way, proud of what he'd built, even if he'd built it on a foundation he didn't know was hers. But she was prouder of what she was about to do. "Will you be there tomorrow? At the presentation?" "Do you want me to be?" He hesitated, just a fraction of a second, but enough. "Of course. You're my wife." But his eyes said something different. They said, "Please don't. Please stay home where you won't complicate things. I'll bring you coffee." "How's that?" Relief flooded his face. "That'd be perfect. You're amazing." She smiled and kissed him goodnight. And then she went to her office and finalized the plan with Naomi. "Everything's in place," Naomi confirmed. "The documents are ready. The investors have been subtly prepped. They'll be primed to pay attention when you reveal yourself." "And the evidence about Claire?" "Compiled and ready. Email chains, expense reports, the employment contract. All of it paints a picture of significant conflicts of interest." "Good. Monique, are you sure? Once you do this, there's no going back." Monique looked down at her belly, where her daughter was moving, strong kicks suggesting a personality already forming. "I'm sure. My daughter needs to see that you don't accept betrayal quietly, that you don't let people treat you as less than you are. Your father would be proud." Monique smiled, tears pricking her eyes. "I hope so." The next morning, she dressed carefully. A modest gray dress from Target. Comfortable shoes. Minimal makeup. The perfect costume for the role she'd been playing. She made coffee, good coffee, from expensive beans she'd bought but pretended were just a little splurge, and poured it into a to-go cup. "You're the best," Darius said, kissing her forehead before heading out early to prepare. Monique waited an hour. Then she called an Uber and headed to Summit Core's office. In the lobby, she paused, looking up at the building that housed the company she owned. The company her husband thought was his. Her phone buzzed. A text from Naomi. Ready when you are. Monique placed her hand on her belly, feeling her daughter kick. Let's show them who we are, she whispered. And then she walked into the elevator, heading to the confrontation that would change everything. The photographs arrived on a Tuesday. Monique remembered the day precisely because it was her 20-week ultrasound, the day she'd confirmed she was having a daughter. She'd gone alone because Darius had a critical investor call that couldn't be rescheduled. She watched the ultrasound screen in the darkened room, seeing her daughter's tiny fingers and toes, her perfect profile, the steady flutter of her heartbeat. Would you like to know the sex? The technician asked. Yes, Monique whispered. It's a girl. Congratulations. Monique cried then, tears of joy mixed with profound sadness. She was bringing a daughter into the world, but the father was actively betraying their family. She texted Darius from the parking lot. It's a girl. His response came 20 minutes later. That's great. Sorry I missed it. Call ran long. Talk tonight. No excitement. No questions about the baby's health. Just perfunctory acknowledgement before moving on to whatever, or whoever, was consuming his attention. Monique drove home in silence, hands resting on her belly, talking to her daughter. You deserve better than this. You deserve a mother who stands up for herself, who doesn't accept being treated as an afterthought. When she arrived home, there was a package waiting, unmarked, delivered by courier. Inside was a tablet with a single encrypted file. Monique opened it with trembling hands. The private investigator's report was thorough and devastating. Photographs, time-stamped and geotagged. Darius and Claire entering the Peninsula Hotel, 2:47 p.m. on a Thursday afternoon, when Darius had told Monique he had back-to-back board meetings. Darius and Claire at Gibson Steakhouse, sharing a bottle of wine that cost more than the monthly budget Darius claimed they needed to stick to at home. Darius and Claire in his car, parked along the lakefront trail, their bodies close enough that there was no mistaking the intimacy. But the photographs were just the beginning. The investigator had also pulled text messages, legally obtained through Claire's iCloud account, that she'd carelessly left unsecured on the company network. The messages were explicit, not just about the affair, but about their plans. Claire, I can't wait until all this is settled and we don't have to hide anymore. Darius, soon. After the baby comes and I get the Series B closed, I'll talk to a lawyer. She'll be reasonable about the divorce. She always is. Claire, what if she's not? Darius, she doesn't have any leverage. The company's mine, the assets are mine. She's a designer who works from home. Any lawyer will see she's better off taking a settlement and moving on. Monique stopped breathing when she read that. Any leverage. The company's mine. The arrogance. The complete dismissal of their marriage, of her, of the child growing inside her. And the assumption, the staggering, insulting assumption, that she had nothing, that she was nothing beyond what he'd allowed her to be. There were more messages. Some were mundane planning, coordinating when Monique would be out so they could meet. Some were romantic in a way that made Monique's stomach turn. Some were strategic discussions about Claire's career. Darius, you deserve the director position. You've earned it. Claire, people will talk. Darius, let them. I built this company. I can promote whoever I want. That promotion had been approved 4 months ago. Monique had seen it in the board documents, a 40% salary increase and equity package well above market rate. At the time, she'd flagged it as questionable but not acted. Now she understood. It wasn't merit-based. It was Darius funneling money and equity to his mistress using company resources. Resources that were technically Monique's, given her majority ownership. The final section detailed Claire's background. Stanford MBA, as advertised, but also a pattern of relationships with superiors at previous companies. A reputation as someone who networked aggressively. Nothing illegal, but a clear pattern of using relationships to advance her career. Monique sat with the tablet for hours, reading and rereading. The baby kicked periodically, as if reminding her what was at stake. Finally, she called Naomi. I got the report, Monique said, voice steady despite tears on her cheeks. I'm sorry. I know that can't have been easy to see. I need to know my options. Legally. For divorce. For everything. Divorce. The company. Making sure my daughter is protected. Naomi was silent for a moment. Monique, I have to ask, are you making this decision from emotion or strategy? Both. I'm hurt and angry and betrayed. But I'm also clear-headed about what needs to happen. He's planning to divorce me, take the company he thinks is his, and marry his mistress. I need to make sure that when this ends, and it will end, I'm not the one left with nothing. You could confront him now. File for divorce. As majority owner of Summit Core, you'd have significant leverage in any settlement. No, that's too clean, too easy for him. What do you mean? I mean, I want him to expose himself. I want the investors, the staff, everyone who thinks he built this company from nothing to see exactly who he is. I want the mask to come off publicly. That's aggressive. He's been lying to me for months, using company money to wine and dine his mistress, planning to discard me like I'm disposable. You're damn right I'm aggressive. Naomi sighed. Okay, what do you want to do? I want to prepare a full dossier. Every financial irregularity, every conflict of interest, every piece of evidence showing he's been treating Summit Core like his personal piggy bank. And I want it ready to present to the board and investors at the exact right moment. Which is, I'll know it when I see it. But soon. Over the next 3 weeks, Monique and Naomi built the case. It wasn't hard. Darius had been sloppy in his confidence. Company credit cards for personal expenses, dinners with Claire coded as investor relations on nights when there were no investor meetings. Bonuses for himself that exceeded what was authorized in his contract. Claire's compensation package violated the company's stated guidelines. Each violation was relatively minor, but together, they painted a picture of someone who saw Summit Core as his personal kingdom. This is damning, Naomi said, reviewing the compiled documents. Any board would see this as grounds for removal. Good. But Monique, I have to warn you. This will be public. Once you do this, everyone will know about the affair, about your hidden wealth, about all of it. Your privacy will be gone. Monique had thought about that. She'd spent 18 months hiding who she was. The idea of exposure was terrifying. But the alternative, staying silent, letting Darius control the narrative, allowing herself to be quietly divorced and dismissed, was worse. I know. I'm ready. And the baby? Monique placed her hand on her belly, 7 months pregnant now, her daughter active and strong. This is for her. So she grows up knowing her mother didn't accept being treated as less than she is. The plan came together piece by piece. Monique would wait for a significant company moment. Ideally, the Series B presentation, when investors would be gathered. She'd attend as the supportive wife, playing her role perfectly. And then, at the right moment, reveal everything. The key, Naomi advised, is to let him make the mistake first. Don't attack unprovoked. Wait for him to show his true colors in front of the people who matter. Then strike. Monique agreed. She didn't want to be seen as vindictive or emotional. She wanted to be seen as what she was, a woman defending her interests and dignity against someone who'd betrayed both. The waiting was the hardest part. Living with Darius while knowing everything. Watching him prepare for the Series B presentation with such confidence. Listening to him practice his pitch, talking about his vision and his company, without awareness that every word was ironic. At night, she'd lie awake beside him, feeling her daughter kick, and imagine the moment when everything would change. She practiced what she'd say, how she'd stand, the tone she'd use, calm, controlled, devastating in its precision. But she also grieved. For the man she'd thought she'd married. For the marriage that had been real to her even if it hadn't been real to him. For the family they might have been if he'd made different choices. 1 week before the Series B presentation, Darius came home in a particularly good mood. It's all coming together, he said, kissing her forehead while she sat with her feet up, belly so large now that simple movements were challenging. The investors are excited. The term sheet is almost finalized. Once this closes, everything changes. That's wonderful, Monique said, meaning it in a way he couldn't understand. Because he was right. Everything was about to change, just not in the way he expected. The night before the presentation, Monique barely slept. She lay in bed, listening to Darius breathe beside her, feeling the weight of what was coming. Her phone buzzed softly. A text from Naomi. Everything's ready. Legal team is on standby. Documents are prepared. Just say the word. Monique typed back, tomorrow, after he shows them who he is. She placed her hand on her belly, feeling her daughter shift and turn. Tomorrow, sweetheart, she whispered in the darkness. Tomorrow you'll see what it means to stand up for yourself. The baby kicked in response, strong, insistent, ready, just like her mother. The boardroom of Summit Core Innovations occupied the top floor of a renovated warehouse in Chicago's West Loop. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the city skyline, and morning sun painted everything in gold and steel. It was beautiful. Monique had approved the lease through one of her shell corporations without Darius ever knowing. Now, standing in that space with a coffee cup in hand and her pregnant belly pressing against her modest gray dress, she felt a strange calm settle over her. This was it. The moment everything had been building toward. Darius stood at the head of the conference table, his presentation displayed on the large screen. He wore one of the Tom Ford suits, the navy one Claire had probably helped him pick out. His hair was perfectly styled, his smile confident as he made eye contact with each investor. There were 15 of them. Monique knew every one by name, by portfolio, by risk tolerance. She'd been studying them for months, watching how they voted on board decisions, how they responded to challenges. Richard Caldwell sat closest to Darius, the lead investor, a silver-haired veteran of Chicago's tech scene. Beside him was Marcus Webb, younger and more aggressive, always looking for the next unicorn. The others were a mix: institutional investors, family offices, successful entrepreneurs. All men, all white, all accustomed to being the smartest person in the room. Claire sat near the back, her role as director of investor relations giving her a seat, but not a prominent one. She wore a cream-colored blouse and navy pants, blonde hair pulled into a neat chignon. Professional, polished, playing her part perfectly. Monique had entered quietly, exactly as planned. The supportive wife bringing coffee. A few investors had glanced at her, expressions ranging from polite acknowledgement to mild surprise at her very pregnant state. "Gentlemen," Darius said, voice carrying easily across the room. "Thank you for being here today. What you're about to see represents 18 months of focused execution on a vision that I believe will fundamentally change how." That's when Monique approached with the coffee. She'd intended to simply hand it to him and step back, to wait for the right moment later. But Darius had other plans. "Not now," he said, not even looking at her, waving her away like she was an interruption. Monique stopped. "I thought you might want." "I said not now, Monique." His tone sharpened. Several investors shifted uncomfortably. And then she made her move. Not the planned one, but an improvisation born of 18 months of swallowed anger. "Actually, I think the investors might want to hear about the ownership structure before you get too far into the pitch." The room went still. Darius turned to her, expression flickering between confusion and irritation. "What are you talking about?" "The ownership structure of Summit Core. It's relevant to any investment decision. Don't you think, Mr. Caldwell?" Richard Caldwell looked between Monique and Darius, his experienced investor instincts clearly sensing something off. "I suppose it could be relevant, yes." Darius forced a laugh, tight, controlled. "Monique, sweetheart, you're tired. Why don't you head home and rest?" "I'm not tired. I'm pregnant. There's a difference. This isn't appropriate." "What's not appropriate is raising $12 million without disclosing that you're not actually the majority owner of this company." The room erupted in murmurs. Darius's face went red. "That's ridiculous. You own 23% of Summit Core. These fine gentlemen collectively own another 17%, which leaves 60% unaccounted for in your presentation. Would you like to explain that, or should I?" That's when Darius made his fatal mistake. He stepped toward her, hand reaching out not to guide her gently, but to physically remove her. His palm connected with her shoulder. Not a hit exactly, but a shove, forceful enough that she stumbled backward, hand instinctively going to her belly. The reaction was immediate and visceral. "Jesus Christ," Marcus Webb said, standing up. Richard Caldwell's expression turned to stone. "Darius, what the hell?" But Monique recovered quickly. She straightened, hands still protective over her belly, and looked at Darius with an expression that was equal parts pity and steel. "Thank you. I was trying to decide if I should give you one more chance to come clean. But you just made this much easier." She turned to the investors. "Gentlemen, my name is Monique Davis. Some of you may be familiar with my family's holdings in Atlanta. My father was Jonathan Davis of Davis Holdings." Several investors reacted, sharp intakes of breath, exchanged glances. Jonathan Davis had been legendary in investment circles. What you may not know is that I am the majority owner of Summit Core Innovations. I control 60% of this company through a network of shell corporations that were established 18 months ago, right around the time my husband decided to start this venture. She tapped her phone, and suddenly the presentation screen changed. Darius's slides disappeared, replaced by a corporate structure chart showing the intricate web of LLCs and offshore entities that all traced back to one name: Monique Davis. "This is insane," Darius managed. "You don't have that kind of money." "Actually, I do. My family has been managing wealth in the Southeast for 3 generations. When my father died 2 years ago, I inherited a controlling stake in a portfolio worth approximately $3.2 billion. Give or take." The silence was absolute. "I chose to hide my wealth when we met. I wanted to know if you loved me for who I was, not what I had. And for the first year, I thought maybe I'd found something real." She looked at Darius, and for a moment, her pain showed through. "But then Summit Core launched, and I watched you change. I watched you become someone who prioritized ambition over integrity." "Monique, please. I'm not finished. I invested in this company because I believed in you. I wanted to support your dream. But I also wanted to see if success would reveal your true character. And it did." She tapped her phone again. Now the screen showed email chains, carefully selected, devastating. Emails from Darius to Claire, discussing operational needs that included dinners at expensive restaurants on nights when there were no actual investors to entertain. Emails approving Claire's promotion and compensation package, with language that made it clear the decision was personal, not professional. Emails from Darius to himself, documenting bonuses he'd approved without board authorization. "These are just samples. My attorney has compiled a comprehensive dossier of financial irregularities, conflicts of interest, and breaches of fiduciary duty. All documented, all verifiable." Richard Caldwell had been scrolling through his phone, clearly doing research. When he looked up, his expression was grim. "The Davis family holdings, these are real. Very real," Naomi Sterling said, entering the boardroom right on cue with 2 associates carrying bankers' boxes. "Good morning, gentlemen. I'm Ms. Davis's attorney. We have documentation to support everything she's told you." Darius finally found his voice, though it came out strangled. "You can't do this. This is my company. With my money," Monique said quietly. "Money you never knew came from me. Money you've been treating as your personal bank account while planning to divorce me and marry your director of investor relations." Claire had gone white. Several investors turned to look at her. We're not," Claire started. "Save it. I have the text messages, the hotel receipts, the photographs. I've known about the affair for months." She turned back to Darius. "I also know you've been planning to leave me after our daughter is born. That you told Claire I'd be reasonable about the divorce because I don't have any leverage." Darius's face cycled through several colors. "So here's what's going to happen. As majority shareholder, I'm calling an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning. At that meeting, we'll be discussing a change in management structure. I think it's time Summit Core had leadership that understands the difference between ambition and integrity." Marcus Webb closed the folder Naomi's associate had given him. "Ms. Davis, I think that's appropriate. In fact, I'd like to formally request that you consider taking an active role in the company's leadership going forward." "I appreciate that, Mr. Webb. We can discuss specifics at tomorrow's meeting." Richard Caldwell stood, expression a mixture of respect and wariness. "I have to say, this is the most elaborate due diligence test I've ever seen. You've been evaluating us while we thought we were evaluating the company. I've been evaluating everyone. My father taught me that the true measure of people is how they behave when they think they have power over you. Darius just showed you exactly who he is." The investors started gathering their materials, the meeting clearly over despite Darius's presentation being only halfway complete. Darius stood there, his carefully constructed world crumbling in real time. "Monique, wait. We can talk about this. Privately. You're right. We do need to talk. But not here. Not now. Right now, I need to go home and rest. Because unlike you, I actually care about the health of our daughter." She turned to leave, but Darius grabbed her arm. "You can't just destroy everything I've built." "I can," Monique said, gently but firmly removing his hand. "Because I built it too. You just never bothered to notice." She walked to the door, where Naomi stood waiting. As she passed Claire, she paused. "For what it's worth, you're talented. You could have made it on your own merit. You didn't need to sleep with the boss. Claire looked down, unable to meet her eyes. At the doorway, Monique turned back one last time. Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. Don't be late to your own board meeting, Darius. The door closed with a soft click. In the hallway, Naomi touched her arm gently. You okay? Monique took a deep breath, hand on her belly where her daughter was kicking, strong, insistent movements that felt like applause. I'm perfect, she said. And for the first time in months, she meant it. Darius came to the condo that night. Monique had been expecting it. She'd actually been surprised he'd waited until after 9 p.m. But perhaps he'd needed time to process, to strategize, to figure out what possible angle could salvage the situation. She was sitting in the living room when she heard his key in the lock. Their Lincoln Park condo, purchased through one of her LLCs, she'd realized with bitter irony, felt different now. Lighter. As if the truth had burned away the oppressive weight of pretending. Monique. His voice was cautious, tentative. In here, she called. He appeared in the doorway, and she was struck by how small he looked. Something essential had collapsed in him. The swagger, the certainty, the easy charm. Can we talk? He asked. That's why I didn't change the locks. She gestured to the chair across from her. Sit. He sat, hands clasped between his knees, looking more like a guilty teenager than a CEO. For a long moment, neither spoke. Finally, Darius broke the silence. How long have you known? About the company, I mean. Since before you founded it. I've been the majority investor from day one. He absorbed that, expression cycling through several emotions. And the affair? 5 months. Since about 3 weeks after I found out I was pregnant. He flinched. Monique. Don't apologize yet. I need you to understand something first. She leaned forward, hands resting on her belly. When we met, I was terrified of being used for my money. My father warned me that wealth changes people, not just the person who has it, but everyone around them. So I hid it. I created a version of myself that would be safe to love. I did love you, Darius said quietly. I do love you. No, you loved who you thought I was. You loved the idea of a woman who would support your dreams without complicating them. Who would stay home, stay quiet, stay small so you could feel big. That's not fair. It's completely fair. The moment I stopped being convenient, the moment I got pregnant and became a responsibility instead of just a cheerleader, you looked elsewhere. Darius looked away, unable to meet her eyes. Do you know what the worst part is? It's not even the affair. It's that you planned to leave me after you secured the Series B. You were going to use my money to make yourself rich, divorce me when I was most vulnerable, and then build your life with Claire using resources that were never actually yours. I didn't know it was your money, Darius said desperately. You thought you'd done it all yourself. And that was exactly what I needed to know. When success came, you didn't become more generous or grateful. You became entitled. She stood slowly, pregnancy making the movement awkward. Walking to the window, she looked out at the Chicago skyline. I loved you. I really did. When you proposed with that modest ring, when we had our small wedding, when you talked about building something together, I believed in all of it. We can still. No, we can't. Because I've seen who you really are now. And I can't unsee it. Darius stood, voice rising with desperation. I made mistakes. I was stupid and selfish and I hurt you. But people can change. We can go to counseling. You can what? Rebuild the trust you destroyed? Convince me you won't resent me every time I assert myself? Make me forget you planned to abandon me and our daughter. Our daughter. Darius latched onto the words. Monique, she needs a father. She needs both of us together. And there it was, the manipulation she'd been waiting for. Using their unborn child as leverage. Our daughter needs to see her mother stand up for herself. She needs to learn that love doesn't mean accepting betrayal. That being forgiving doesn't mean being a doormat. She walked closer, close enough to see the fear in his eyes. And yes, she needs a father. But she needs one who will show her how men should treat the women they love. Right now, you're not that man. Then let me become him, Darius pleaded. Give me a chance to prove I can change. Monique felt the baby kick, hard, as if her daughter was responding. She placed her hand over the spot, drawing strength from that small life. Here's what's going to happen. Tomorrow morning, you're going to attend the board meeting. You're going to resign as CEO. Monique, please. I'm not finished. You'll resign, but I'm not going to destroy you publicly. You'll get a severance package, generous, actually, more than you deserve. You'll retain your 23% equity stake, though you'll be voting it as a minority shareholder with no management control. She paused, making sure he understood. You'll also sign a separation agreement that includes full custody rights for me, with supervised visitation for you, until we can establish a healthier co-parenting relationship. You'll attend therapy, not couples counseling, individual therapy. You have this all planned out, Darius said, something bitter in his voice. Of course I do. Did you think I spent 18 months hiding my identity without learning to think strategically? And if I refuse? Monique smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Then I released the full dossier to the press. Every email, every receipt, every text message with Claire. I file a lawsuit for breach of fiduciary duty that will tie you up in court for years. And I make sure every investor, every potential employer, every person in Chicago's tech scene knows exactly what kind of man you are. She let that sink in. Or you can take the deal I'm offering, which allows you to maintain some dignity and build a relationship with your daughter. Your choice. Darius slumped back into the chair, the fight draining out of him. You've really thought of everything. I learned from the best. Power isn't about crushing people. It's about knowing when to show mercy and when to demand justice. So which is this? Mercy or justice? Both. Justice for me, for our daughter, for everyone you hurt. But mercy too, because despite everything, I don't want to destroy you. I just want you to face consequences. She sat back down, suddenly tired. I want you to understand what you threw away. Not the money. You never knew about that. But the partnership we could have had. The family we could have been. Darius's voice cracked. I do understand. I see it now. Do you? Or do you just understand that you got caught? He didn't answer, which was answer enough. They sat in silence for several minutes. Finally, Darius spoke again. What about Claire? She'll be asked to resign. She'll receive a severance package, smaller than yours. And she'll sign an NDA. That's generous. It's practical. I don't gain anything from ruining her career. She made poor choices, but so did you. The difference is she didn't make vows to me. Darius nodded slowly. When do you want me to move out? This weekend. Naomi will send over the details. Which furniture is yours? How we'll handle the joint accounts. And the baby? When she's born. For the first time, Monique's expression softened slightly. You'll be there, if you want to be. And you'll have visitation rights. I'm not going to keep your daughter from you. But you need to earn the right to be an active parent in her life. How do I do that? By becoming the man I thought I married. By doing the work. By showing up consistently. By proving you can put someone else's needs before your own ego. She stood, signaling the conversation was over. The board meeting is at 9 a.m. Naomi will have the resignation documents ready. After that, we'll figure out the rest. Darius stood too, looking around the condo one last time. For what it's worth, I am sorry. Not just because I got caught. Because I hurt you. Monique studied his face, looking for sincerity and finding something that might be the beginning of it. I believe you. But sorry isn't enough to fix what's broken. He nodded, accepting that. At the door, he paused. You're going to be an amazing mother. Our daughter is lucky to have you. She'll be lucky to have you too, Monique said quietly. If you choose to be the father she deserves. After he left, Monique stood at the window again, watching the city lights blur as tears finally came. She'd held herself together through the boardroom confrontation, through this final conversation, but now that she was alone, the grief hit her fully. She grieved for the marriage that had never been what she'd hoped, for the partnership that had existed only in her imagination, for the family they might have been. But underneath the grief was something else. Relief. Pride. The bone-deep satisfaction of having stood up for herself instead of accepting betrayal quietly. Her daughter kicked again, and Monique placed both hands on her belly. We're going to be okay. Better than okay. We're going to show the world what strength looks like. The baby kicked in response, and Monique smiled through her tears. Tomorrow would bring the board meeting, the official end of Darius's tenure, the beginning of her public life as a business leader. But tonight, she allowed herself to feel everything. The pain, the anger, the loss, and yes, the triumph. She'd passed her father's test. She'd shown herself what she was capable of when pushed to the edge. And now, she'd show her daughter that same strength. The board meeting started at exactly 9 a.m. Monique arrived 15 minutes early, pregnancy making it take longer to get anywhere. She'd dressed carefully, a navy maternity dress from a designer she'd previously avoided, paired with her grandmother's pearls. The woman who walked into Summit Core that morning was not the modest interior designer who'd brought coffee yesterday. This was Monique Davis, heir to a business empire, claiming her birthright. The conference room was already filling up. The 15 investors from yesterday, plus several new faces, representatives from the shell corporations she controlled, now revealed as her people. Naomi sat near the head of the table, documents organized with military precision. Darius arrived at 8:57. He looked like he'd aged a year overnight, dark circles under his eyes, his usual confidence replaced with something hollow. Claire wasn't with him. She'd resigned via email at 6 a.m. At exactly 9 o'clock, Monique called the meeting to order. "Good morning, everyone. Thank you for making time on short notice. I know yesterday's revelations were shocking, so I wanted to address everything formally and transparently." She stood at the head of the table, the same spot where Darius had stood 24 hours earlier. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. "First, let me confirm what you learned yesterday. I am Monique Davis, daughter of Jonathan Davis of Atlanta. Upon my father's death 2 years ago, I inherited controlling interest in a portfolio that includes Davis Holdings, Davis Commercial Properties, and Davis Venture Capital, among other entities." Richard Caldwell took notes. Marcus Webb recorded on his phone. Everyone paid attention in a way they never had when she'd been just the wife. "Through strategic investments over the past 18 months, I acquired 60% ownership of Summit Core Innovations. This was done legally, with all required SEC filings completed through my network of holding companies." She pulled up a slide showing the corporate structure, cleaner now, without the need for deception. "I chose to invest anonymously for personal reasons. I wanted to evaluate the company's leadership and culture without the bias that comes with being openly identified as a major shareholder." Patricia Chun, an investor from an institutional fund, raised her hand. "Ms. Davis, with all due respect, this is highly unusual. Why the secrecy?" Monique had expected this. "My father taught me that people reveal their true character when they believe you're powerless. I wanted to see how this company operated when its leadership thought they were accountable only to distant, anonymous investors. What I found was concerning." She nodded to Naomi, who began distributing dossiers, sanitized versions without the most personal details about the affair, but comprehensive about the financial irregularities. Over the past year, Summit Core CEO engaged in a pattern of behavior that violated his fiduciary duties to shareholders. Unauthorized bonuses, conflicts of interest in hiring and compensation decisions, and a general pattern of treating company resources as personal expenses. Darius sat motionless, staring at the table. "As majority shareholder, I cannot in good conscience allow this leadership to continue. However, I also recognize that Summit Core has value, both the technology we've built and the team we've assembled. My goal is not to destroy what's been created, but to ensure it's led with integrity going forward." She turned to Darius. "Mr. Thompson, would you like to address the board?" Darius stood slowly. His hands shook slightly as he pulled out a prepared statement. "I hereby submit my resignation as CEO of Summit Core Innovations, effective immediately." The words hung in the air. "I made serious errors in judgment. I let my ambition cloud my ethics. I betrayed the trust of this board, our investors, and most importantly, my family. I take full responsibility for my actions." He sat down, the statement clearly all he could manage. Monique felt an unexpected pang of sympathy, quickly suppressed. This was necessary. Consequences mattered. "The board accepts your resignation," she said formally. "Naomi, can you outline the separation terms?" Naomi stood, all business. "Mr. Thompson will receive a severance package equivalent to 6 months' salary. He will retain his 23% equity stake as a minority shareholder with no management authority. He will sign a non-disparagement agreement and will cooperate fully with the transition process." Marcus Webb spoke up. "And who will lead the company going forward?" Monique had been dreading and anticipating this question in equal measure. "I will be taking an active role as executive chairwoman. However, I recognize that I'm 7 months pregnant and about to have a child. Therefore, I'm proposing we bring in an experienced CEO to handle day-to-day operations." She pulled up another slide, a resume. "I've already reached out to Sandra Martinez, former COO of a successful Chicago fintech. She's expressed interest in joining us, pending board approval. Richard Caldwell nodded slowly. I know Sandra. Excellent reputation. If you can get her, that would be a strong signal to the market. I can get her, Monique said with quiet confidence. Over the next hour, they worked through details. Vote counts, transition timelines, communication strategies. The investors asked hard questions, and Monique answered them with the knowledge she'd been hiding for 18 months. She knew the technology. She understood the market. She could speak their language because it had always been her language. She'd just been pretending otherwise. By 11 a.m., the votes were counted. Sandra Martinez would be offered the CEO position. Darius's resignation was accepted. Monique was officially recognized as executive chairwoman. As the room cleared, Richard Caldwell approached her. That was masterfully handled. Your father would be proud. You knew him? Monique asked. Met him once, at a conference in Atlanta about 15 years ago. He gave a talk about long-term thinking and investment strategy. The main point I remember was that the best investors play games no one else realizes are happening. Monique smiled. That sounds like him. You learned well. Richard extended his hand. I look forward to working with you, Ms. Davis. After everyone left except Naomi, Monique sank into a chair, exhausted. You did it, Naomi said quietly. We did it, Monique corrected. So what now? Monique placed her hand on her belly, feeling her daughter's familiar kicks. Now I prepare to be a mother. And I figure out how to run a company while raising a child. You'll have help. Sandra's solid. The board is supportive now that they understand who you are. And Darius? He signed everything. He'll be out of the condo by Sunday. Monique nodded, feeling the finality of it. 3 months later, the Chicago skyline was painted in shades of pink and gold, a September sunset that made the city look like something from a dream. Monique stood at the window of her new office in Summit Corps headquarters, her daughter Amelia sleeping in a bassinet beside her desk. Amelia had been born 6 weeks ago, perfect and healthy. Darius had been there for the birth, and he'd cried when he held her for the first time. Tears that seemed genuine, born of awe rather than manipulation. He'd been consistent with his visitation, attending his therapy sessions, slowly rebuilding some version of trust. Monique didn't know if they'd ever have a functional co-parenting relationship, but he was trying. That had to count for something. Sandra Martinez had exceeded expectations as CEO. In 3 months, she'd restructured operations, improved company culture, and positioned Summit Corps for sustainable growth. The Series B had closed, smaller than originally planned, but with better terms and investors who valued ethics as much as returns. And Monique had stepped into her role as executive chairwoman with a confidence that felt both new and ancient. This was who she'd always been, just hidden behind a mask of modesty. Amelia stirred, making small sounds that meant she'd wake soon. Monique lifted her daughter from the bassinet, settling into the chair with her. Your grandfather would have loved you, she whispered, looking into Amelia's dark eyes that somehow seemed wise beyond their 6 weeks. He taught me so much about power and patience, about testing people to see their true character. Amelia yawned, unimpressed with the business philosophy. But here's what I'm going to teach you. Power isn't about controlling others. It's about knowing yourself so completely that no one else can define you. It's about standing up when you'd rather sit down. It's about mercy when you have every right to seek revenge. Her phone buzzed. A text from Darius. Can I FaceTime with Amelia before bed? No pressure if it's not a good time. Monique considered. Then, give me 10 minutes. She was learning that justice didn't require cruelty. That holding people accountable didn't mean withholding love from a child who deserved to know her father. Below, the city hummed with evening traffic, thousands of lives intersecting in ways they'd never fully understand. Somewhere in one of those buildings, another woman was probably being underestimated. Another man was probably overestimating his own importance. But Monique had learned that strength wasn't loud. It didn't need to announce itself. Real strength was her daughter sleeping peacefully in her arms while Monique ran a company worth millions. It was the ability to show mercy without being weak, to demand justice without being cruel. Real strength was choosing wisely when to reveal your power, and having the patience to wait for exactly the right moment. Your mother learned that the hard way, sweetheart, Monique said softly. But you won't have to. You'll grow up knowing your worth from day one. Amelia made a small sound that might have been agreement. Monique smiled and returned to the window, looking out at the city her father had taught her to navigate. She'd passed his test. She'd proven that people showed their true character when they thought you were powerless. And in doing so, she'd shown herself, and soon, her daughter, what real power looked like. Not in showing strength in a single moment, but in making choices that mattered for generations. The sunset deepened, painting the office in warm light. Somewhere in the building, the night shift was starting. In Atlanta, the Davis family holdings continued their quiet accumulation of wealth and influence. And in Monique's arms, the next generation slept peacefully, protected by a mother who'd learned that sometimes the greatest victory wasn't destruction. It was justice tempered with love.
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Subscribe, like, and click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.